Lopez. He is our keynote, and we are so honored and privileged to have him here. I want to welcome to the stage Jeffrey Deskovic.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
Let's do that again. Good evening. Good evening. One more time. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thanks for coming out tonight.
Thank you.
In 1989, a classmate of mine was found murdered and raped. Peekskill was a small town with a population of approximately 20,000 people. Murders were very rare. So when this murder happened, it understandably it created an atmosphere of fear, of rumor, of paranoia. Parents were concerned with their own safety as well as the safety of their children. In high school, I was quiet. I was to myself. I didn't participate in very many organized sports. This made me seem strange to some of the kids in the school. In the course of the police investigation, they interviewed many students from that school. Some of those teenagers told the police that they might want to talk to me because I seemed strange to them. This is what the police said initially attracted them to me. The other factor which they said attracted them to me was that they claimed that I was overly upset at the victim having been murdered. Yet there were mental health facilities set up all throughout the town of Peekskill to help people process what had happened, again keeping in mind that murders were very rare. They reached a point in the police investigation that they asked me to take a lie detector test. I agreed to take the test. And so the next day, rather than report to school, I instead went to the police station. As I just mentioned, it was a school day, which meant that neither my mother nor my grandmother with whom I lived realized that anything was wrong, and hence they did not call around looking for me. They drove me to the town of Brewster, which was in Putnam County in New York. I was a native of Peekskill, which was in Westchester County, New York. The significance of my sharing that with you is that meant I was no longer able to leave on my own. I was instead dependent upon the police. They put me in a small room. I did not have an attorney present. I wasn't given anything to eat the entire time that I was there. They played the game known as good cop, bad cop, in which one officer takes a more aggressive role, while the other pretends to be a friend who's opposed to what's happening, yet is somehow powerless to intervene. The purpose of this tactic is that when a person's being questioned, when you become fearful, it's only natural that you look to a friendly face for support. The polygraphist himself was actually a Putnam County Sheriff's investigator, pretending to be a civilian, hiding the fact from me that he was, in fact, a police officer. They attached me to a polygraph machine. Now, before commencing the test, the polygrapher gave me countless cups of coffee. And the reason why that's important is because the premise of the polygraph is that when a person tells a lie, you'll become nervous. The nervousness will result in the pulse rate being sped up. And in fact, it is the pulse rate which is measured by the machine. Other factors, however, which will lead to the pulse rate being sped up would include fear and caffeine. They used all kind of scare tactics on me. The polygraphist invaded my personal space. He raised his voice at me. He kept asking me the same questions over and over again. As each hour passed, so too did my fear increase in proportion to the time. Towards the end of the interrogation, the polygraphist made a statement to me. He said, "What do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the test that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm this." When he said that to me, that really shot my fear through the roof. At that point, who should make his grand appearance other than the police officer who was pretending to be my friend? He informed me that the other officers were going to harm me, but that he was holding them off, but could not do so indefinitely. You have to help yourself here, you understand. Considering I had maintained my innocence for the previous 7.5 hours, it was clear what he meant by that. They wanted me to confess. When it was added that if I did as they wanted, not only would they stop what they were doing, but that I could go home afterwards. Being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, not thinking about the long-term implications, instead being concerned with my own safety, right then myself and the police. I took the out which they offered, and I made up a story based upon information which they had given me in the course of their interrogation. By the police officer's own testimony, by the end of the interrogation, I was on the floor in the fetal position, crying uncontrollably. Needless to say, I was arrested. I was in fact charged with murder and rape. Now, before I went to trial, the results of the DNA test came in from the FBI lab. Semen found in the victim did not match. But rather than acknowledge they made a mistake, they instead continued to prosecute full speed ahead. In order to explain away the exculpatory DNA test, the prosecutor elicited fraud on the part of the medical examiner. When a medical examiner makes his findings, there are audio as well as written notes which are making contemporaneously as the findings are made. It was only 6 months after doing that initial autopsy, and only after the DNA didn't match, that suddenly, for the first time, the medical examiner claimed that he found medical evidence to show that the victim, a 15-year-old immigrant from Colombia, in the country for a mere year and a half, leading a very sheltered life in which she never went outside, save accompanied by her parents or her older sister, that he found that evidence that showed that she was sexually active. That's what enabled the prosecutor to make that argument. He even went so far as to name the other youth that supposedly had this encounter with her. Yet, they never performed a DNA test in order to prove it, nor did they even call this other youth as a witness to give verbal testimony to that effect. He just made the unsupported argument to the jury. At the same time, the public defender that I had was not very good. Here are some of the things that he failed to do and things that he should have done. Firstly, when the medical examiner, who was playing this unusually important role in my case, when it was time for cross-examination, my lawyer stood up in open court and, with a big smile on his face, as if him and the medical examiner were old friends from way back in the day, said, "You're going to be pleased to know that I don't have a single question for you." He never investigated my alibi witness, nor even called him to give testimony. At the time that the crime happened, I was in fact playing wiffle ball. When the fraud was committed by the medical examiner and this other youth's name was used, my attorney was supposed to investigate this false theory and just generally explode that myth. Yet he never did, because that youth was represented by another member of the public defender's office who was representing me. So that conflict of interest hindered the defense. Not only was it just any public defender, but in fact it was his supervisor who was supposed to be answering questions that he had as he represented me. My lawyer never explained to the jury the significance of the DNA excluding me, nor did he use the DNA to argue that the so-called confession was coerced and false. When we hadn't decided if we were going to have a jury trial or a bench trial, the trial judge came to my attorney off the record and told him, "Pick a jury, because I don't want to be responsible for finding your client not guilty." Yet my lawyer never put that on the record as a basis to ask the judge to recuse himself. To me, that statement that the judge made indicates bias, and also that public pressure must have been getting to him. Add it all up, I guess it's not that surprising that the jury found me guilty. I'll never forget the day that I was found guilty, because to me it was like some sort of nightmarish alternative reality, because to my way of thinking, at least up until that point in time, only guilty people were actually convicted. Yet they said what they did, and I was taken into custody. On the day of the sentencing, I begged the judge to overturn the verdict, because I was innocent, and I referenced the DNA to support my contention. He actually told me on the record, "Maybe you are innocent." That didn't lead him to step up for justice and exercise his discretion by overturning the conviction. Instead, he took the politically expedient way out and sentenced me to a term of imprisonment of 15 to life. I would like to share with you a little bit about my prison experience. I still remember the first day. I remember having on handcuffs and a chain around my waist, and my legs being fastened together, as well as being fastened on the bus to the prisoner sitting next to me. I remember how large the prison walls loomed and how frightening the barbed wire appeared. I don't mind sharing with you that it was a very scary experience. As I walked down the cell gallery, I saw many prisoners there whose arms were as big as my legs. It didn't take a lot of figuring out on my part that if any of them decided to assault me, that I would not be able to protect myself. I also had the built-in handicap of knowing that if they discovered what I was incarcerated for, which was a rape along with that murder, that this would serve as motivation on their part to assault me, because in prison there's a vigilante mentality towards people who have been convicted of sex offenses. The guards themselves were obstacles. To be sure, some were professional and did their job. Yet there were others who came to work and brought the problems from their personal life into the facility, displacing it onto the prisoners. Then there were other guards who even their peers disliked because it